Hello, and welcome to GodPods, Faith Conversation podcast brought to you by the Church in the 21st Century Center at Boston College. My name is Lynn Baradelli, and I am the Associate Director of the Center and Managing Editor of C21 Resources, a complimentary magazine which offers a compilation of articles on key challenges facing the Church today. The issue published fall of 2024, Liberal Arts Education, Its Value and Impact, is dedicated to education in the Jesuit Catholic tradition. This episode is part of a series highlighting the magazine and is titled How to Be Attentive, Reflective, and Loving, Advice from a Recent BC Grad. This is the second conversation in a series with recent graduates led by the guest editor of this issue, Elizabeth Shlala, who serves as Associate Dean and Professor of the Practice in the University core curriculum. Professor Shlala spoke with Dennis Wieboldt, a 2022 graduate who shares insights and advice on his experiences in and formation through Jesuit education. Enjoy the podcast.
Good morning, Dennis. Great to be with you this morning. I've known you for a long time now, actually. Upon reflection, I think I met you the first weekend of your freshman year at Boston College.
Yeah, it must have been.
Yeah,
must have been.
which is almost 6 years now, or 6 years now?
Yeah, 6 years.
Amazing. So can you remind me a bit about how you chose Boston College, what you were expecting, and what you actually found when you got here?
Yeah, I can't believe it's been 6 years since I first arrived here. So my college application process, most of it was really focused on, can I identify a school that's really academically excellent? And that was almost the sole criteria for decision making. At the end of the day, when we had been thinking about schools, I recall it was the winter or spring of my senior year of high school. We had visited sort of all the schools that I'd applied to, all of which were uniformly going to prepare me to go to graduate school, go to law school, get a good job, whatever at the time I thought was the next step. But I remember coming to BC, I think for one of those admitted Eagle days, and I was just looking around and my mom noticed, she said, everyone looks very happy here. I see smiles on people's faces, and that wasn't something that we had seen at many other schools. So at the time, to be honest with you, I didn't really think much of it, but I took my mom's advice and I said, this...
Always good to do.
Yes. And so I figured BC's going to be a place that looks like I'll enjoy myself. I'll be around people who seem to genuinely be enjoying their time, and I also know it's a place that's really academically excellent. It wasn't, interestingly, now that I look back on it, I knew BC was a Jesuit Catholic school, but it wasn't really a factor in the decision. I'd gone to public high school, I grew up Catholic, so we had known that BC was a Catholic school. Some of the other schools I applied to weren't Catholic, but definitely wasn't a dispositive factor at all. So now as I reflect back on, I guess it was 7 years ago that I was thinking about where I'm going to go to school, interesting to see how much has changed in that time.
Absolutely. I do know that the university core curriculum immediately did some of that shaping and formation. I recall you took a complex problems course that maybe you could say a bit about, but more than that, I'd also like to talk to you about how your Jesuit education shaped both your faith and reason inside and outside the classroom. So I think thinking about the theology and philosophy classes are probably quite important as well.
Yeah, the core curriculum here really was my first introduction to robustly Jesuit and Catholic education. And if I had to identify sort of one thing that really put me on the path to where I am today, it would be those first year classes. So the fall of my freshman year, I'd taken a complex problems course focused on immigration.
Still an issue today, I'm afraid to say.
Really?
Yeah.
And it was a great class. Me and 2 or 3 of my friends had taken it together. We lived near each other. So it was a formative experience, both because of the way in which the class was taught. We had 2 faculty members coming at it from different perspectives. We had all these freshmen from all these different walks of life, and I recall I would walk from my dorm to class with my friends. We'd talk about something, we'd go to lunch, and we'd still be talking about it. We'd go back at night, and we'd still be talking about it. So that sort of, that engagement, both of the mind and the heart, as you're talking to your friends about the course material, I found to be really valuable. So that was one piece of it. And then I think the second was I'd been encouraged during freshman orientation to take perspectives on Western culture. I think whoever had suggested it to me was like, look, this is an easy way for you to get your philosophy and theology out of the way. And I was an unassuming freshman. I said, okay, that sounds...
Sign me up.
Yeah, it sounds like a good idea. So I went into it not really knowing much about the course other than fulfilled my requirements. It would be a full year, and people who had taken it seemed reasonably to have enjoyed it. And coming from a public high school, we're thinking about the big questions in life. Certainly not encouraged, and just not something that happens frequently, I think is a general proposition, but true also in my particular experience. And then I sat in that class and we were reading sort of these great thinkers and these great texts that were grappling with questions that thousands of years ago people were thinking about, but that, for a freshman in college, the types of questions that also come up. So as, that first semester went on, I was building relationships with friends. In the context of this course, we were thinking about how to live a good life. I think that was the theme of the perspective sections for that year. And then by the time that the spring had come around, I really thought to myself, there's something about that experience, thinking about those big questions, that's really changing the way I think both about my academic life and also my personal life. And in part with that sort of, it's almost difficult to describe. You just had a gut feeling that something here is feeling right. So by the spring of my freshman year, I'd been a history major and I added a theology major, which again, coming from public high school, my family was like, what does a theology major even entail? So it's a learning experience for us all, but something that I really, really valued.
So I think it's fair to say that through the university core curriculum, you develop not only your intellectual life, but also some sort of personal disposition or posture to asking big questions. What is a good life? What is that going to entail? There's another hope for us as you take the university core curriculum and then go into your major and your minors is that you also start to understand the Catholic Jesuit idea of what it means to be a man and women for others. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about that experience at Boston College, particularly perhaps through your student government work.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think my first time really thinking about the idea of men and women for others, so it's something that the university really does a good job of emphasizing to freshmen, but at that time, so it's more of an introduction. You hear this phrase, you don't quite know what it means, but you know it's important to the university. So I think I'd taken a mental note of it during our summer orientation. And then the first time I really had to think about it critically was in that immigration class. I took my first semester. When you're in high school, you have all sorts of political ideas that you later realize probably weren't that good to start with. But sitting in that class and talking to the professors, both of whom were really excellent in their independent fields, and when you brought them together, really made you think about things in a different way. And as we were talking about an issue as politically fraught as immigration, something about being in that course with people who you're starting to get to know, you develop a sense of empathy, I think, for the individuals who you're studying in the class and the experiences that they're sharing through the articles you're reading, the books you're reading in class. And something clicked, I think, in that class as I was starting to come to recognize what that phrase, men and women for others, meant. And then, as you suggested, almost contemporaneously with starting the class, I decided a little bit on a whim. I was like, I think this student government might be a good thing to participate in. So a friend of mine and I ran for student government our freshman year. We had won. I credit our win more so to the donuts that we gave out on election day than anything about our respective electoral virtues. But either way, sitting through those meetings, again, freshman year, you don't really know all that much about some of the challenges that students face in college in general, at BC in particular. And again, in the back of your mind, you're thinking about this idea of men and women for others. I was seeing these upperclassmen during our freshman fall, and then during the spring when COVID hit, there was that idea of men and women for others, a totally different dimension. So I think true to BC's mission of forming students both in mind, but also in heart and in soul, there's something about the academic experience of, again, in that class, thinking about what does it mean to be men and women for others, in that case in particular for people who are coming to the United States for so many reasons unimaginable to many people in my own shoes. So you have that academic sort of engagement, you're talking with friends inside and outside of class, and then you're involved in co-curricular activities where you're starting to see other people devote hours and hours and hours outside of class to helping other students who are going through a difficult time. And over time, I think that you're encouraged as a student here to emulate that type of care for others, and hopefully something now that I still think about all the time when I'm discerning my own future, thinking about the things that I'm involved in, and also just reflecting more generally on sort of our political climate and things like that.
You mentioned thinking about the challenges that other students were facing freshman year, and then of course COVID hit, so there was a lot going on. And the empathy that your coursework fostered in you by looking at others and how they were dealing with certain situations. But you yourself, can you think of any challenge that you actually dealt with over the course of your undergraduate education and how that played a role in your faith journey? It's one thing we really haven't spoken about yet, but that's another element, I think, of your Boston College experience, right? You mentioned growing up Catholic, but I think for all of us, when we encounter different people and different ideas at university, our faith journeys lead us maybe on a different path than it would have thought of 6-7 years ago.
Yeah. So I think the big, and it's COVID related, but this had been true before COVID. So I'd probably say when I was a kid, I was a little bit more, I was very lucky to have great friends, but I was always a little bit independent. So I'd like to do things on my own, chart my own path, which there's virtues in that. But I think when I came to BC, and I remember during freshman orientation, all of these kids were getting together at late hours of the night, just like watch TV. And it was a foreign experience for anyone. But I think especially for someone who's a little bit more independently minded coming into school. So when I transitioned into BC, I was lucky. I'd gone from a very small middle school to a very large high school. So I knew what it was like to acculturate into a much bigger environment. But at the beginning of freshman year, I was trying to figure out for myself, what does it mean to have my own sort of independent streak that I kind of had previously, and to fit into these different groups of these different communities, friend communities, things like that. So I think that was a little bit of a challenge my first year, and that especially became true during COVID. So if you were someone, myself included, who was a little bit more kind of set off to themselves at times, COVID certainly didn't help. So the friendships that you had begun to form, they didn't detach, but they took on a radically new form that nobody really could have anticipated. And so by the time the spring of my freshman year had come around, some of maybe the latent challenges that I'd faced in positioning myself and groups of friends and things like that just took on a totally new form. And that was connected too, I think, to my faith, because when we were lucky enough to be back our sophomore year, we had plethora of health restrictions and things like that, which changed the academic and personal experience pretty radically. But we could still be on campus. I lived in an apartment with my friends. We had many meals in the dorm as opposed to in the dining hall. So there were virtues in that too, I think. And at this time, so I'd been living in Walsh Hall. For those who aren't familiar to BC, Walsh Hall is probably only a 5-minute walk to the School of Theology and Ministry, which is right on the other side of the road. And I had my sophomore year started to go to daily mass, initially because there wasn't much going on, there wasn't much human interaction, but mass was something that was going on. So I'd kind of gone on a whim. During my first year, my faith had really started to develop, again, in the coursework, and it also started to go to mass more frequently. And so during my sophomore year, I'd kind of developed almost like a tiny spiritual community at the School of Theology and Ministry with people who I had no idea who they were. Most of them, I think, were graduate students at the School of Theology and Ministry. I, at the time, was a second-year undergraduate. I didn't even know most of their names. And it had started, again, more implicitly than explicitly, put a seed in me that, look, you don't go through life alone. You go through it with other people, and you go through it in community. That's one of the things that a great college experience teaches you, is that we're all dependent on one another. Even in your coursework, you're realizing that when you're talking to friends, you're helping each other out. Some of the content of the coursework, think about the immigration context, if anything, that those sort of experiences really illustrate what it means to be dependent on other people and to show compassion for others. So by the time that sophomore and junior year had come around, especially junior year when a lot of the COVID restrictions had dissipated, I became a much more community-oriented person. I was reaching out to friends more, and even now, looking back on that, I became much more interested in both participating in communities and leading to the extent that I could. And that became really central both to my faith. I started inviting friends to Mass, which was, I had friends who had never really gone to Mass or who weren't going very frequently who would come with me. And that experience of community, that experience of faith together in community As I look back on what I was like when I was a freshman, just almost totally different people, and a totally different disposition of mind and heart that I think is a real testament to the power of a Jesuit Catholic education.
Was there one particular faculty member or mentor on campus that also led you on that path in your faith journey, or you met along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. So I met him by chance. I'd attended an event on religion and politics. Again, I'd been in my first semester in this philosophy and theology class. I was like, oh, this seems interesting. Bringing the course content into conversation with ongoing events. Mark Massa, who's a Jesuit here at BC, the director of the Boise Center for Religion and American Public Life. I'd gone to this event. I really liked it. I said, wow, this is a really interesting way to think about political events in light of a faith tradition. During the spring of my freshman year, I'd taken a class with him, classically entitled Religion and American Public Life. And through that course, we developed of course, like an academic mentorship relationship. He had later gone on to co-supervise my undergraduate thesis and co-supervise my master's thesis. And so we had, beginning my freshman year, really extending to today, a really strong academic relationship. But also, I didn't forget that he was also a Jesuit priest involved in a form of ministry to students. And just being able to watch the ways in which he was encouraging me to become a better student, but also a better person with a real concern for the common good. Another term next to men and women for others that a BC education really emphasizes. What are you doing to advance the common good? Not sort of the type of vocabulary that you hear in everyday life, but something that you really come to appreciate, I think, at BC. And so throughout my time at BC, again, beginning freshman year, Father Massa, he was just a mentor who I couldn't have asked for anything more from. To this day, we're in contact. We see each other every once in a while. And it's those sorts of relationships, again, thinking about being in community, that have encouraged me over time to pay it forward. I got so much from mentors here at BC who, for no reason, I couldn't help them with anything. I was a little freshman at the time. Just self-giving, that idea that's so central to Jesuit Catholic education. I received that in spades here. So I think the challenge, in a good way, for me as I started to recognize the importance of that, is how do you pay that forward? And that's very much in line with the idea of being a men and women for others.
Yeah, this notion of giving it away, and all of us, hopefully, working on this project toward the common good, were these formational in your postgraduate plans in pursuing the law, legal studies, law school? Can you talk a bit about that? And we live in challenging times. We probably, as a historian, always live in challenging times. But as a young person who is really dedicating himself to the law and legal studies and what the future will look like for our country and perhaps for the world, how do you reconcile your legal studies with the challenges we face and your deep faith?
There was a towering priest here by the name of Michael Wahimes, who I never actually had the opportunity to meet, but he was very involved in the C21 Center. And I recalled shortly after deciding to come to BC, I'd run a random Google search for Boston College. I think it was on YouTube, actually. And one of the first videos that came up was this lecture that he gave. It's called The Last Lecture. If anyone listening to this hasn't listened to it or seen it, I highly encourage you to. It must have thousands and thousands of views now, probably maybe even over 10,000. And in that lecture, his point, the big takeaway he was trying to suggest to students was, following a comment that Jesus makes in the Gospels, you never have anything until you give it away. And I remember listening to it before I'd ever arrived on BC's campus as a student. It's like, I don't know quite what that means. It sounds really nice, but it also sounds like an oxymoron, and so I'm not really sure. But it's one of those things that, again, very typical, I think, of the BC experience. You hear something profound, you catalog it in the back of your mind, eventually to return to it when the circumstances are right. And so as my time at BC progressed, I grew in faith, I grew in my academic understanding, again, philosophy, theology, but also paired with a real sort of personal spirituality. I continue to return to that idea of you never have anything until you give it away. Mm-hmm. If you think about a career in the law, in many ways, your whole job is giving yourself and your skills away to others. The challenge, of course, is as a lawyer, thinking about how do you give those skills away, and what do you put those skills in service of? One of the things that BC really taught me was to make sure when whatever skills you have, whether those be legal skills or otherwise, give those skills away in pursuit of the common good, in pursuit of something greater than just your own interests. I'm now doing a law degree and a Ph.D. in history at Notre Dame, and true also to Notre Dame's Catholic mission is the idea of really using your skills in service of the common good. So as I think about my future, my professional future, my personal future, whether or not that's in a traditional legal practice role or something else, that idea of really being able to use your skills in service of others is so central. In fact, I'd probably say it is the most important criteria for decision making as I think about what are my next steps in life and how can I best position myself to do unto others as I would want done unto me.
Are there any particular social or political issues that you're passionate about and you see your legal education particularly preparing you to tackle?
Yeah, so I was really lucky as a master's student at BC. So I spent my last 2 years here, 1 year finishing my bachelor's, beginning my master's, second year doing the master's. I was able to take a course at the BC Law School with Professor Kathleen Caveney on the freedom of religion. It was a really interesting course because obviously freedom of religion is a buzzword, I think, in the nation, always has been, and I think particularly in recent years. And at the time, I was the only student in the course who wasn't in law school, so I was coming at the questions somewhat differently. But I was reading these stories of these people in the United States who were really living out their faiths. Most of the cases we had read there were no Catholics involved in the cases. I think in particular, there was a case we read, Wisconsin versus Yoder, with Amish individuals. And thinking about, can we design a constitutional system? Can we enforce constitutional rules that really empower people to live out their faith in an authentic way? That was really the question of the course. And again, it was at the time just an introduction to me. But in the years since taking that course, thinking about freedom of religion, the freedom of religion from a academic perspective has been a big part of my joint studies in law and history. I'm actually working on a dissertation now on the lawyer who argued that case with the Amish, William Bentley Ball. He argued Wisconsin versus Yoder. I think probably one of the most important First Amendment cases to be argued in the 20th century. And so now I keep thinking one of the great things about the United States is that we do cherish freedom of religion because it empowers people, like the freedom of religion empowered Catholics through the 19th and 20th centuries to really build great universities like BC where they can really pay their mission forward. And so now as I think about my own future, both in the law and the historical profession, thinking about the ways in which I can put my skills at the service of freedom of religion and helping others really have the space to both believe and to put those beliefs into action.
That's wonderful. Dennis, it's been wonderful catching up with you today. I want to ask you before we end, looking back, reflection is also something that we really encourage our students, faculty, and staff to do at Boston College. Reflecting and discerning on your time at Boston College, what would you say you are most grateful for?
That's the $1 million question. That's a tough one. I'm grateful for so many things about BC, and I think I've incurred a debt to BC that can never be paid back. And I think that's true for me as it is for many other students who are lucky enough to call this place home for 4 years. But I think very true to thinking back to those first days during freshman orientation when you and all these strangers are sitting together watching a hockey game or a baseball game in the lounge in one of the dorms. You think about that idea of men and women for others, this really in many ways radical disposition to helping others, thinking about yourself less than the way in which you're helping other people live the best way that they can. I think what I'm most grateful for in thinking about my experience at BC has to be the people who, through total self-gift, that idea of giving yourself away to others, mentored me, supported me, encouraged me, at times gave me sharp criticism to when I was doing something that maybe I shouldn't have been doing, to remind me, maybe don't think about that path, think about this instead. And there's just something that a great college experience should give students, but I think particularly so at a Jesuit Catholic university, where you're encouraged to think about yourself and larger networks of people who are all committed to the same goal, and that's advancing the common good. I think BC as a university does an outstanding job of doing that as an institution. It is able to find faculty and staff who are committed to doing that themselves and to enabling students to think about their own lives and their own futures in light of that overarching goal. So to BC, I can't be any more grateful than I am to the people it introduced me to, yourself included, and the C21 Center included, who really have encouraged me to think about my life, my future in a totally different way.
Well, Dennis, thank you so much. I have to tell you, speaking with yourself and others like you, young graduates, give a lot of hope in a time that can be somewhat dark, somewhat challenging, but we know that there are others carrying on the light, and it's wonderful to hear indeed. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of GodPods. For more faith resources, visit our website at bc.edu/C21 or find us on social media at C21 Center.